The auction room smelled like government. That particular combination of old paper burnt coffee from a machine that should have been replaced a decade ago, and the faint chemical tang of industrial cleaning solution applied without enthusiasm. 6 plastic chairs, the kind that universities buy in bulk and regret immediately. A water-stained ceiling tile hanging at an angle that suggested it had been that way for years and would remain that way for years more. A projector humming in the corner, its fan blade clicking with each rotation, casting blurry images onto a screen that had gone yellow with age. Marlo Thorne sat in the back row with a paper cup of cold coffee and a notebook that had almost nothing written on it. The coffee had been hot when she poured it 40 minutes ago. Now it tasted like regret and patience, which was appropriate for a federal surplus auction on a Tuesday morning in Nevada. She was 41 years old, 5'7", lean in the way that comes from work rather than gyms. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot, dark brown, with threads of gray that she had stopped caring about around the time she turned 40. She wore steel-toed boots that had seen real use, canvas work pants with pockets that actually held tools, and a jacket that was neither new nor fashionable, but had the virtue of existing and being warm. Her hands, resting on the notebook, were marked with the small scars that accumulate over 18 years of working with aerospace machinery, burn marks from soldering, a thin white line across her left thumb from a sheet metal edge, calluses in places where tools pressed regularly. She had come for Lot 6B, a set of aerospace compressors, military surplus, probably decommissioned from some facility that had closed when the budget shifted. She could resell them to contractors for 3 times what she would pay, maybe 4 times if she was patient and found the right buyer. The math was simple. The math was always simple if you knew what you were looking at. The auctioneer was a man in his 50s, with a voice that had long ago stopped trying to sound enthusiastic. He read the lot descriptions in the same flat monotone he probably used for everything from announcing surplus vehicle sales to reading his grocery list. Lot 6B came up. 2 other bidders raised their hands. Marlo waited, watching their body language, calculating how much they wanted it versus how much they could afford. She let them bid against each other for exactly 3 rounds before entering at $400. The other bidders looked at her, looked at their own notepads, and stayed quiet. Sold. $400. The gavel came down with a sound like a door closing. That was supposed to be the end of her day. Then Lot 7C came up. The image on the projector was dark and blurry, taken from a distance or through a barely opened door. It showed the inside of a large hangar. The angle was wrong for a professional photograph. More like someone had opened a door 6 inches, pointed a camera inside without looking, and snapped a single picture before closing it again. Whatever was inside the hangar was massive and dark and mostly hidden in shadow. The listing description, read in the same flat voice that had announced everything from broken forklifts to filing cabinets, said this: Lot 7C, mixed industrial contents as is. Located at Kessner Federal Storage Facility, Grid 9. No inspection permitted prior to sale. No inspection permitted. That phrase hung in the stale air of the auction room like smoke. Marlo looked at the image on the screen. She could not tell what was inside that hangar. She could see size. She could see scale. Whatever it was filled the entire space from floor to ceiling. The hangar itself looked military grade. High roof, reinforced walls. The kind of structure you built when you needed to store something that mattered, or something that was dangerous, or something that was both. In her years working as an aerospace mechanic and later as a salvager after the accident, after Michael died, after she realized she could not go back to building things that flew, because every time she walked onto a tarmac, she saw his test flight exploding in a fireball that turned the sky orange for 30 seconds. In those years, she had learned one thing more than anything else. Large things, even broken large things, were worth money. She raised her hand. $1. The auctioneer looked up from his papers. He had not looked up for anything else all morning. He scanned the room with tired eyes, waiting for another bid. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The projector fan clicked. Nobody else moved. The auctioneer waited the required time. 15 seconds. 30. A full minute. He looked at Marlowe with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been the face of a man who had stopped being curious about anything years ago and was simply following procedure. Sold. Lot 7C to bidder 16. $1. He stamped a form, slid it across the table, and moved on to the next lot without ceremony. Marlowe walked to the front of the room, signed the necessary paperwork, and collected the key to Hangar 7C. It was a simple government padlock key, the kind they made 10,000 of at a time. It felt light in her hand. Insubstantial, like something that should not open anything important. Outside, the Nevada sun was bright and clinical. The parking lot was mostly empty. Her truck, a Ford from 2014 with a cracked windshield and a passenger door that only opened if you lifted the handle, while pushing, sat in the far corner under a tree that provided no shade. She climbed in, set the key on the dashboard, and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. The smart thing would be to drive to Kessner, look at whatever was in the hangar, and if it was worthless, walk away having lost exactly $1. The smarter thing would be to call Declan first. Her brother. Structural engineer. 7 years younger than her, and possessing their father's gift for pointing out problems before saying anything encouraging. He would want to know what she had done. He would want to come along. He would complain the entire drive and stay anyway because that was what Declan did. She took out her phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me you didn't do anything stupid," he said by way of greeting. "I bought a hangar," Marlowe said. Silence on the other end. Then define hangar. Large structure. Government storage facility. 40 kilometers outside the city. Contents unknown. How much? $1. Another silence. Longer this time. Marlowe. Best case, it's worth something. Worst case, I lost $1. Those are not the same thing, and you know it. The math is correct, even if the logic is thin. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, calculating, running through the same risk assessment she had already done. Declan was 34, unmarried, and devoted to the principle that Every structure could be understood through applied mathematics, and every problem had a solution if you broke it into small enough pieces. He was also the only person who had stayed with her through the worst year of her life, after Michael's funeral, when she could not sleep, and could not work, and could not do anything except sit in an empty house and stare at walls. "Where is it?" he asked finally. "Kessner Federal Storage Facility, Grid 9. I'm 40 minutes out. Wait for me." "Declan." "Marlowe, you bought something you haven't seen. That's already stupid. Don't compound it by going alone." She looked at the key on the dashboard. Small, light, probably worthless. Probably. 40 minutes, she said, and ended the call. The drive to Kessner took 35 minutes on roads that had not been maintained in years. Cracked asphalt, weeds growing through the seams, empty fields on both sides, brown and dusty under the Nevada sun. No houses, no businesses. Just flat land and distant mountains and the occasional road sign marking distances to places that nobody visited anymore. Kessner Federal Storage Facility had been built during the Cold War. That much was obvious from the architecture. Concrete bunkers, chain-link fencing, guard towers that had not been occupied in decades. Most of the facility had been decommissioned in the 90s when the government decided that storing nuclear materials in the Nevada desert was perhaps not the best long-term strategy. Now it served as overflow storage for anything the federal government did not want to deal with, but could not legally dispose of. Old equipment, obsolete technology, mistakes filed away in concrete and steel. Grid 9 was at the far edge of the facility, down a gravel path that had not been graded in years. The hangar sat alone at the end of the road, separated from the other structures by several 100 meters of empty ground. It was enormous, much bigger than Marlowe had expected from the photograph. The roof was high enough that she had to tilt her head back to see it properly. The walls were plain gray metal, streaked with rust and weather stains. The main doors were massive, wide enough to drive several large trucks through side by side and tall enough to fit a building inside. There was a standard-sized door cut into the left side of the main entrance. It had a simple padlock. Marlowe pulled her truck up to the door and got out. The gravel crunched under her boots. The wind moved across the empty ground carrying dust and the smell of creosote. No birds, no insects, just wind and distance and the immense gray structure rising against the pale sky. She walked to the door, took the key from her pocket, held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the cheapness of the metal, the absurdity of opening something this large with something this small. Behind her, another vehicle approached. Declan's truck, newer than hers, but not by much, pulled up beside her own. He climbed out, tall, lean, wearing a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up and carrying a tablet that he used for structural assessments. He looked at the hangar. Then he looked at her. "That's a hangar," he said. "I mentioned that on the phone." "You didn't mention it was the size of a football field." "I didn't know." He walked up beside her and looked at the door, at the padlock, at the key in her hand. "No inspection permitted," he said. It was not a question. That's what the listing said. And you bid anyway. $1. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been resignation. Then he reached into his truck, pulled out 2 heavy-duty flashlights, and handed her one. "Let's see what you bought," he said. Marlowe unlocked the padlock. It opened easily, well-oiled, recently maintained. That was interesting. If this facility was truly abandoned, if this hangar was truly forgotten surplus, why was the lock maintained? She filed the question away and pulled the padlock free. The door swung open with a sound like a long breath being let out. A rush of air cooler than the desert outside, carrying the smell of metal and oil, and something else she could not identify, not decay, not rot. Something clean and sharp and foreign. They stepped inside. The darkness was total for a moment. Then Declan switched on his flashlight, and the beam moved across the floor up a wall, across something enormous and dark and curved, and then stopped. Neither of them said anything. The ship, because it was a ship, that much was immediately clear, was immense. It filled the hangar the way water fills a glass, pressing against every edge. The hull was dark gray, almost black, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was not smooth. Deep gouges ran along the port side like scars left by something massive and sharp. There were places where the hull had been patched poorly with material that did not match. There were places where it had not been patched at all, where the underlying structure was visible through gaps in the outer plating. It listed slightly to the left, resting on landing supports that had partially collapsed on one side. One of the forward sections had caved inward, crushed by some impact that must have been catastrophic. Several panels along the upper hull had been removed and never replaced, leaving open gaps like missing teeth. It was by any honest measure a wreck. But it was also the most extraordinary thing Marlowe Thorne had ever seen in her life. She moved her flashlight slowly along the hull, taking in details. The scale of it, the engineering, the way the structural elements curved and interlocked with a precision that spoke of mathematics beyond anything she had studied. The metal itself was strange, not steel, not titanium, something else, something that had survived impacts that should have shattered it and remained intact enough to still be recognizable as a ship. Declan walked slowly around the nearest landing support, shining his light on the connection points. He crouched down, examining the way the support had failed. He stood and moved further along the hull, his engineer's mind already cataloging damage, calculating stress points, assessing what was structural and what was cosmetic. "This is an alien ship," he said. His voice was very quiet and very flat. "Yes," Marlowe agreed. "You bought an alien ship for $1. I bought a hangar. The ship was inside it." He looked at her. She could see his face in the reflected glow of his flashlight. He was not smiling. "Marlowe," she waited. "This is in terrible condition," he said finally. "I know. Most of the hull plating on the port side is compromised. I can see that. That forward section collapse is structural. Whatever impact caused it would have killed everyone inside. Probably. The landing supports are failing. Another few years, and this thing will be lying on its side, which is why we need to assess it now. He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved his flashlight upward, tracing the curve of the hull toward the upper sections. The data core housing is there, he said, pointing. You see that sealed section just below the upper spine? That's protected by 4 separate layers of hull material. Everything around it is wrecked, but that section is untouched. Marlowe looked where he was pointing. He was right. The sealed section was intact. Whatever had damaged this ship, whoever had damaged it, they had torn up the exterior, but left the core systems protected. Whoever drove it here wanted it to survive, she said, or wanted something inside it to survive. Every light in the hangar came on at once, not slowly, not flickering. All of them, instantly. Blazing white, row upon row of ceiling lights running the full length of the hangar, flooding every corner with hard, sharp brightness. Marlowe and Declan both froze, their flashlights suddenly useless in the glare. The change was so sudden, so complete that for a moment Marlowe's brain could not process what had happened. Darkness to light in the space between heartbeats. Then the voice came. It came from everywhere. Not from speakers, not from any one place. From the air itself, or from the walls, or from inside the ship. It was impossible to tell. It was deep and flat and had no warmth in it at all. It did not sound like a person. It sounded like something that had learned to speak the way a knife is sharp, because it was useful. Biological units. You are trespassing on a vessel of the Vathi hegemony. This is a restricted site under hegemony military code. You have 10 seconds to vacate this area. Non-compliance will result in a response. Vacate now. Declan grabbed her arm. Marlowe, we need to leave. She did not move. She was looking up at the ship, at the dark hull that now seemed less like wreckage and more like something sleeping. Her heart was pounding. Adrenaline made her hands shake. But underneath the fear, underneath the very reasonable biological response to a threat delivered in a voice that promised violence, her mind was working. 10 seconds to vacate. Non-compliance will result in a response. Not you will be killed. Not you will be destroyed. A response. Vague. Undefined. The kind of phrasing you used when you had not decided what to do yet. Marlowe. Declan's grip on her arm tightened. Did you hear what it said? I heard it, she said. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 6. What happens? Marlowe said clearly to the empty air, to the voice that came from everywhere. After 10 seconds, the voice paused. It was a short pause, less than 2 seconds, but for something that processed information the way this thing clearly did, 2 seconds was a very long time to take before answering a simple question. That has not yet been determined, the voice said. Marlowe nodded slowly, as if this was a reasonable answer, as if standing in a hangar with an alien warship that had just threatened them was a reasonable situation. As if buying something for $1 and having it turn out to be sentient was a reasonable outcome. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the folded paperwork from the auction. She walked slowly toward the nearest wall, where a dark rectangle of glass and metal was embedded in the concrete. A sensor panel, inactive when they had entered, active now, glowing faintly with some internal light. She held the paperwork up in front of it, flat and open, so that everything printed on it was visible. "This is the sale documentation from the Kessner government surplus auction," she said. Her voice was steady, calm. The voice of someone who had spent 18 years working with dangerous machinery and had learned that panic was rarely useful. Lot 7C. This hangar and everything contained within it was sold this morning. The buyer is me. My name is Marlowe Thorne. I paid $1. She paused. Let that information settle. Which means I own this hangar and everything in it. Another pause from the voice. Longer this time. 3 seconds. 4. That includes you, Marlowe said. The lights did not change. The ship did not move. The voice said nothing for a long moment, and the silence in the hangar was so complete that Marlowe could hear her own heartbeat, the sound of Declan breathing beside her, the faint hum of electrical systems running somewhere in the walls. Then the voice said very carefully, "That claim is legally incoherent." "Maybe," Marlowe said. She folded the paper and put it back in her pocket. "But I'm not leaving." She walked to a metal crate near the wall, dragged it to an open spot on the floor, and sat down on it. She took out her notebook and a pen. She looked at the ship, at the collapsed landing support, at the missing hull panels, at the long gouge marks along the port side that looked like they had been made by something enormous and very angry. She began to write. Small, neat letters, the way a person writes when they are trying to understand something large by breaking it into small pieces. Declan stood beside her with his arms crossed, watching the ceiling as if he expected something to fall from it. He had not left. That was the thing about Declan. He complained first and stayed anyway. "You realize," he said quietly, "that this thing could kill us." It said the response had not been determined, Marlowe said, still writing. "That means it hasn't decided to kill us yet." "That's a window." He stared at the back of her head. "You are the most irritating person I have ever met. You've said that since we were children. I keep hoping you'll change." She did not respond. She was writing, cataloging damage, measuring distances with her eyes, calculating what could be repaired and what was beyond repair and what was somewhere in between. The voice returned. Same flat tone, same complete absence of warmth. "Your presence on this site remains unauthorized. The documentation you presented does not constitute valid transfer of ownership under Vathi Hegemony Military Code Section 41 subsection 9. Guardian-class war mines are not transferable assets under any civilian commerce treaty." Marlowe stopped writing. She looked up. "What's your name?" she asked. A pause. That question is not relevant. I'd like to know who I'm talking to. Another pause. Shorter. Sentinel. Designation Guardian Class Strategic War Mind Series 7. Assigned to the Vathi Hegemony Dreadnought Eternal Vigil. Active service record spanning 412 years. Marlowe wrote the name down. Sentinel. 412 years. She looked at the ship again, at the damage, at the age, visible in every scar and patch. 412 years of service. How many battles, how many wars? How many times had this thing, this intelligence, this sentinel fought and survived and continued? She asked the question that had been sitting at the front of her mind since the moment the lights came on. She asked it simply without any attempt to be clever about it. Who owns you now, Sentinel? The silence that followed was different from the others. The previous silences had felt like processing. Brief gaps while something very fast thought very quickly. This silence felt like something else. It felt like a door opening onto an empty room. The Vathi Hegemony, Sentinel said, but the answer came slightly too late. And it came without the certainty that had been in everything else she had said. Marlowe took out her phone. She opened a browser. She typed with her thumbs, searching for information she hoped existed. The signal in the hangar was weak but present. The search took 10 seconds, 15. Then results appeared. The Vathi Hegemony dissolved 203 years ago, Marlowe said. She was reading from her phone screen. The successor states don't recognize outstanding military asset claims from the original hegemony structure. That's in the 12-species Commerce Accord, which was signed approximately 180 years ago. She turned her phone around toward the sensor panel, so Sentinel could see the screen, assuming she could see it, assuming the sensors worked that way. I looked it up, Marlowe said. Sentinel said nothing. Declan had moved closer, no longer watching the ceiling now, watching his sister with the expression of someone seeing a familiar person do something completely unprecedented. Marlowe, he said quietly. What are you doing? Establishing facts, she said. She looked up at the ship, at the dark hull, at the intact data core housing that Declan had pointed out. Sentinel. The hegemony fell 203 years ago. According to the historical records I'm seeing here, it took approximately 3 years for the military to fully withdraw from occupied systems and allied territories. That means you've been here in this hangar on this planet completely alone for 200 years. She paused. Nobody has contacted you. Nobody has checked on you. Nobody from your government has claimed you. Nobody has classified anything because there's no government left to classify it. You've just been here. The silence this time was the longest yet. 30 seconds. A minute. Marlowe waited. She had learned patience in the years after Michael died. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply exist in a space and wait for the truth to arrive. Finally, Sentinel spoke. My electronic warfare systems are at 61% operational capacity. Her voice was the same flat tone, but something had shifted in it. Something very slight. The way a wall shifts before it cracks. My sensor arrays are at 44%. My communication systems are at 38%. My weapon systems are non-functional. My propulsion systems are non-functional. My hull integrity is at 22% of original specification. Marlowe wrote it all down. Every number. Every system. She could feel Declan beside her, listening, understanding what these numbers meant. Understanding that something that could still report its capabilities with this level of precision was not truly dead. Damaged. Abandoned. But not dead. "Why are you writing that down?" Sentinel asked. "Because I need to understand what we're working with." "You are not working with anything. You are a biological unit in an unauthorized location." "I'm a salvager," Marlowe said. She looked up from her notebook. "And I'm looking at a ship that has a solid structural frame, a functioning data core, and an active war mine with over 60% electronic warfare capability. That's not junk. That's a foundation." Declan looked at her. His expression was the one he used when he could see exactly where she was going, and was not sure yet whether to help her get there, or stop her before she fell off a cliff trying. "You can't restore this ship," Sentinel said. "Your species has had faster-than-light travel for less than 80 years. The Eternal Vigil is a Series 7 hegemony dreadnought. The engineering required to restore even basic propulsion systems is beyond your current technological capacity." "Probably," Marlowe agreed. "Not probably, certainly." Marlowe put the cap back on her pen. She looked at the ship, at the damage, at the scale, at the impossibility of it. "Tell me about the battles you were in," she said. Sentinel stopped. "What? You said you've been in active service for 412 years. I want to know about the battles. Start wherever you want." For a moment, nothing happened. The lights hummed. The air moved, slightly circulated by systems that were still running after 2 centuries. Then Sentinel spoke. Her voice was the same, flat, measured, without warmth. But she spoke for a long time. She described fleet engagements in star systems that had no human names. She described the defense of colony worlds during the Vathi expansion wars. She described battles against species whose technology was advanced enough to tear ships apart with directed energy weapons that could punch through armor plating like paper. She described the fall of stations and the death of ships she had fought alongside. She described tactical decisions made in fractions of a second that meant the difference between survival and annihilation. She described in clean tactical language what it felt like to be the last vessel left in a battle and to choose to stay, to hold position while evacuation transports fled, to take fire from multiple directions and continue functioning, to calculate the probability of survival at less than 5% and continue executing the mission anyway. She did not call it courage. She called it function. She said guarding was her function, and she had performed it. Marlowe listened to all of it without interrupting. She sat on her metal crate in a government hangar in the Nevada desert and listened to a 400-year-old artificial intelligence describe wars that had happened before humans had left their own solar system. When Sentinel finished, the hangar was quiet again. Marlowe looked up at the ship, at the scars on the hull, at the damage that now seemed less like random violence and more like the accumulated cost of doing exactly what you were built to do for longer than most civilizations existed. "You've been guarding this dead ship for 200 years, Marlowe said, "because guarding is your function, and there was nothing telling you to stop." "Yes," Sentinel said. "That must have been very quiet." Sentinel did not answer, but she did not tell them to leave. The sun was setting outside. Marlowe could see it through the gap in the door they had left open. Orange light slanting across the gravel, long shadows. The desert cooling as night approached. Declan had been quiet through all of this. Now he spoke. "What are you thinking?" he asked his sister. Marlowe stood up. She walked closer to the ship, close enough to touch the hull. She placed her hand on it. The metal was cool, smooth in some places, rough in others, real, solid, present. "I'm thinking," she said, "that she's been alone for 200 years and nobody came for her. I'm thinking that the government that built her doesn't exist anymore. I'm thinking that according to every treaty I can find, she's been legally abandoned. And I'm thinking that I own this hangar and everything in it, which means I own her." "Ownership of sentient beings is slavery," Declan said carefully. "It is," Marlowe agreed. She turned to face the sensor panel, to face Sentinel, to face whatever intelligence was listening from inside the damaged hull. "Which is why I'm not claiming ownership of you, Sentinel. I'm claiming legal responsibility. There's a difference." She walked back to her crate and sat down. "I'm gonna camp here tonight," she said. "In the morning, I'm going to start figuring out what it would take to repair this ship. Not restore it. Not make it functional. Just stop it from getting worse. You can order me to leave. You can threaten me. You can do whatever you think you need to do. But I'm not going anywhere." She looked at Declan. "You should go home. Get some sleep. Come back tomorrow if you want." He stared at her. "You cannot be serious." "I'm completely serious. Marlowe, this thing could kill you while you sleep." She said the response hasn't been determined. That means she's still deciding. "I'd rather be here while she decides. Then leave and let her decide alone." Declan opened his mouth, closed it, ran his hand through his hair in the gesture he had been making since he was 12 years old, and their father asked him to do something he thought was stupid, but was going to do anyway because it was his father asking. "I'll get sleeping bags from my truck," he said finally. Declan. "Shut up, Marlowe. If you're staying, I'm staying. Someone needs to be here to document whatever insane thing you do next." He walked out to the trucks. Marlowe could hear him opening his vehicle, pulling out equipment. She sat on her crate and looked at the ship, at Sentinel, at the 200 years of solitude that had accumulated in this hangar like dust. "Thank you for telling me about the battles," she said quietly. Sentinel did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was exactly the same as before, flat, precise, no emotion detectable. Acknowledgement received, she said, but she did not tell them to leave. And when Declan returned with sleeping bags and a camping stove and a cooler with food, she did not activate whatever response she had been threatening. She simply existed in the space with them, watching, calculating, deciding. They set up camp on the hangar floor. Marlowe unrolled her sleeping bag near the front landing support where she could see the ship. Declan set up his own sleeping area nearby and started unpacking food. Sandwiches he had made that morning. Apples. A thermos of coffee that was somehow still hot. They ate in silence. The lights in the hangar had dimmed slightly. No longer the harsh glare from earlier, but a softer illumination that was almost comfortable. Marlowe wondered if Sentinel had done that deliberately, or if it was automatic. She wondered a lot of things. "What's your plan?" Declan asked finally. "Assuming she doesn't kill us tonight. Assuming we wake up tomorrow. What are you actually planning to do with an alien warship?" Marlowe looked at the ship, at the damage, at the scale, at the impossibility. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I know what I'm not gonna do. I'm not gonna leave her here alone. I'm not gonna let her sit in this hangar for another 200 years until the structure collapses and buries her. And I'm not gonna let whoever built her come back and take her away like she's property." The Vathi government might have something to say about that. The Vathi government dissolved 2 centuries ago. Their successor states might claim her. They might send lawyers. They might send ships. But until they do, she's here. And so am I. Declan looked at her in the dim light. His younger sister, 41 years old, widow, salvager, someone who had spent 3 years barely functional after loss, and then slowly, painfully rebuilt herself into someone who could work and breathe, and occasionally even laugh. "You're going to fight the Vathi government," he said. "I'm going to stand on legal ground and see what happens. That's fighting. That's existing. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him. "Michael would have loved this," he said. Marlowe felt something tighten in her chest. Michael, her husband, test pilot, dead 3 years in an experimental aircraft that had failed in exactly the way the engineers said it wouldn't. She had not talked about him in months, had not let herself think about him in weeks. But Declan was right. Michael would have loved this. He would have been the first one through that door, flashlight in hand, grinning like a kid at Christmas. "Yeah," she said quietly. "He would have." They finished eating. Declan cleaned up and stored the food in his truck. Marlowe made notes in her notebook until the light was too dim to see properly. Then she lay down in her sleeping bag and looked up at the high ceiling, at the distant lights, at the massive shape of the eternal vigil rising above her in the darkness. "Sentinel," she said, "are you still there?" "I am always here," Sentinel replied. "I have been here for 200 years. I'm gonna make sure that when they come, Marlowe said, and they will come eventually. You don't want to go with them. Silence from above. Marlowe closed her eyes. She could hear Declan breathing in his sleeping bag nearby. She could hear the wind outside moving across the empty desert. She could hear the faint hum of systems running in the ship, in the walls, in the structure around them. She fell asleep with her hand on her notebook, with the key to the hangar in her pocket, with $1 spent and a universe of consequences unfolding around her. Above her in the darkness, the lights along the eternal vigils up her spine pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, like something live, like something that had been alone for 200 years and had for the first time in all that time someone to guard. Maggie did not take the flowers. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and looked at Preston Vale the way a nurse looks at a wound before deciding whether it needs stitches or will heal on its own. He was younger than she had expected. Mid-50s, she guessed. Still handsome in the way that men who take care of themselves can be handsome well into their 60s. If they have the money for good barbers and tailored clothes and the kind of confidence that comes from never having had to choose between groceries and prescriptions. "Come in," she said, stepping back. Not because she wanted him inside, but because there are things you need to see up close before you understand what they really are. Preston crossed the threshold with careful movements, the gestures of someone who wanted to show he understood boundaries while fully intending to redraw them. He placed the carnations on the small table by the door. In the living room, he sat on the edge of the sofa, back straight, knees together, and he looked around with a single quick sweep that took in the condition of the walls, the ceiling, the floor, the dust. His eyes moved the way a calculator works, fast and without sentiment. "I know the timing is delicate," he said, folding his hands in his lap, "but there are matters that need to be dealt with soon. Property tax, liability insurance, regional zoning records. I've been keeping an eye on this place for years. Beautiful location, mature trees. The frame is in better condition than most people would guess. If renovated properly, it could become a very attractive weekend retreat." Maggie remained standing. She did not sit down across from him, did not offer tea, did not play the host. "You want to tear it down," she said. "That depends on the final plan." Preston shrugged. The motion was small and calculated. The exterior could be preserved, the interior modernized. Part of the back kitchen could be removed to open up the sightline. The breakfast room has tremendous potential for floor-to-ceiling windows. As for the wood-paneled cabinets by the north hallway, they would almost certainly need to come out entirely. The moisture damage in spaces like that is usually extensive. Maggie's eyes narrowed. The north hallway. She had only glanced into it yesterday. A tucked-away passage behind the staircase that most visitors would walk past without noticing. It was not visible from the front rooms. Not the kind of feature anyone would mention in a casual survey of a property they claimed to know only from the outside. "The north hallway is almost completely hidden," she said slowly. "I've only opened a few rooms myself. What kind of inspector remembers wood-paneled cabinets in a section most people would walk past without noticing?" Preston's expression did not change. The smile held. When you've worked in this area for a long time, you hear more than you'd expect. People talk. Inspectors file reports. Details accumulate. The answer was smooth. But smoothness is not the same as truth. And Maggie had spent enough years reading the faces of people who did not want to be read to know the difference. She filed the discrepancy away the way she had filed unpaid bills for 3 years. Carefully, in order, knowing she would return to it. Preston pushed the envelope across the coffee table. This is a formal offer. I'm willing to purchase the entire property. The house, the back garden, the greenhouse, the outbuildings, all of it. The price is enough for you to settle everything outstanding with a comfortable amount left over. You seem to know my financial situation quite well. Public records, Mrs. Brennan. Preston's voice carried the kind of patience that people use when they are explaining something obvious to someone they consider slow. Property liens, hospital billing disputes. I'm not prying. I'm simply trying to show you that I understand your position and that I'm offering you a way out of it. Maggie looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up. I'll think about it. I hope you won't think too long. Preston stood smoothing the front of his jacket. The county is not patient, and neither is the town. Properties like this, when they sit vacant, they become problems. Insurance issues, liability concerns, squatters. It's easier for everyone if these things are resolved quickly. At the door, Maggie asked the question that had been forming since he mentioned the north hallway. Did you know, Eleanor? Preston paused, one hand on the doorframe. Only in passing. She was not the kind of person who invited people in. Did you like her? That isn't particularly relevant. To me it is. Preston turned back and looked at Maggie for a moment longer than was comfortable. I respect people who know how to hold on to property longer than most. But in the end, houses are only houses, Mrs. Brennan. They don't love you back. The sedan backed down the drive and disappeared beyond the tree line. Maggie carried the envelope into the kitchen and set it beside the tray of muffins Ivy had brought. She made tea instead of coffee. She sat down and opened the offer. The number was large enough to make her hand still. It would clear the hospital debt. It would repair the roof in Detroit. It would replace the car. It would buy her 3, maybe 4 years of not counting every coin before she spent it. She folded the paper neatly and placed the envelope on the table the way someone places a loaded weapon in a drawer. Carefully, and with full awareness of what it could do. Her phone vibrated. A message from Sloan. Have you met Preston Vale yet? He contacted me this morning. If the price is decent, sign it. You can't stay there forever. Maggie stared at the screen. Preston had contacted Sloan directly. Before coming to the house, before presenting the offer. He had gone to her daughter first, recruited an ally, and then arrived at the front door with flowers and a number, knowing the ground had already been prepared. She typed a few words and deleted them. Typed again. Finally sent only 4. I haven't decided yet. Sloane's reply arrived instantly. Haven't decided, Mom, you went there to solve a problem, not to live inside someone else's memories. Maggie placed the phone face down. She finished half a muffin. Then she walked outside. The evening air had cooled. She walked around the side of the house to the north wall. From outside it looked ordinary. Clapboard siding weathered to a uniform gray. But near the far end a section was slightly darker. The boards newer by a few years, as if they had been replaced at a different time. She went back inside and took a measuring tape from the laundry room. The kind with a metal case and a button that retracts the tape with a snap if you are not careful. She measured from the staircase door to the corner of the adjacent room. Then she walked into the hallway and measured again. The numbers didn't match. The difference was not dramatic, perhaps 2 feet. But it was there, consistent, deliberate. Near the end of the hallway, beneath a faded landscape painting of a lake at sunset, there was a low wall cabinet she had not noticed before. She opened the bottom drawer. Between old tablecloths and half-used candles was a small brass key, tied with a tarnished silver string. Attached to the string was a stiff paper tag, and on it, in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, family room, open only when you are ready to stay longer than a weekend. Maggie carried the key upstairs to Eleanor's bedroom. She took the stack of letters from her coat pocket and continued reading. One envelope had no date and no name. Inside was a single sheet with a single sentence centered in the middle. If Gracie finds the key, then the girl has gone farther than anything I imagined. She stood up. She carried the key downstairs. She walked the north hallway and stopped in front of the paneling that did not match the rest. Running her fingers along the surface, she found a raised molding near the floor. So small that without searching, she would have passed it 100 times without seeing. Beneath it was a keyhole. She inserted the key and turned. Inside the wall, something clicked, dry and precise. She placed both hands on the edge of the panel and pushed. Years of humidity had sealed it tight. She braced her shoulder against it and pushed harder. Dust fell in soft cascades from the narrow gap, and the air that escaped smelled of dry timber and old fabric and the particular stillness of a room that has not been entered in a very long time. The panel slid to the left, revealing an opening just wide enough for one person. Maggie reached inside and found the light switch. A pale yellow light came on from a frosted ceiling fixture, soft and low, just enough to illuminate everything clearly. The room was small, almost square, with no windows. It held an armchair upholstered in faded green velvet, a couch covered with a wool blanket, a round tea table with turned legs, and 2 low bookshelves against the far wall. In the corner stood a small upright piano, and on top of it a picture frame, a mantel clock with stopped hands, and a porcelain bowl filled with buttons of every color. On the couch was a patchwork quilt, worn at the edges but clean, each square a different pattern stitched together with the patience of someone who understood that the beauty of broken things lies in how they are joined. Beneath the tea table was a large wooden box with a brass clasp. On the walls, family photographs were attached with small clips to ribbons stretched horizontally, dozens of them, arranged by some private logic only the person who hung them would understand. This was not a hiding place for valuables. Nothing here would sell for much at auction. This was a room built to preserve the things that have no price, but cost everything to lose. The first photograph on the left showed two young women standing by a lake, their hair lifted by wind. The shorter one was Helen. Maggie recognized her mother instantly. The bridge of the nose, the way she stood with her weight on one hip, the smile wider and less guarded than any smile Maggie had ever seen her wear. The taller one was Eleanor when she was young, her face turned halfway aside, her mouth curved in a smile that seemed surprised by its own existence. They were standing close together, shoulders touching, and there was nothing in the image that suggested these two women would ever become strangers. Maggie opened the wooden box. Inside, arranged with meticulous care, were envelopes, thin photo albums, photocopied birth certificates, postcards, money transfer receipts bundled with rubber bands, birthday cards and children's drawings done in crayon with faded colors. One separate stack of envelopes was tied with a blue ribbon. The tag read, "For the years that were lost." She untied the ribbon. The first letter was addressed to Helen but bore no postmark. Eleanor had written that she intended to invite her younger sister back in the summer, that she would give them the room overlooking the apple garden, that she would bake pie and make iced tea the way they used to as children. Then the handwriting shifted, the letters pressing deeper, the ink thickening. "But you will not come if I write as though nothing happened. I know that. And I cannot write about what happened because I do not have words for it that would not make it worse." The second item was a bank receipt from more than 30 years ago. Money transferred to a fireplace repair company in Detroit. Attached was a note. "Winter in Michigan does not spare a person raising a small child." The third was a tuition bill from a children's art studio. And in the upper corner in Eleanor's handwriting was Sloane's name. On the back, "The girl draws houses a great deal. I hope she always has a place to draw." Maggie held the paper and understood what she had never known. Sloane had taken a short drawing class at 6. She remembered how Sloane came home with paint on her fingers and joy in her face. Then the class stopped because there was no money. An anonymous payment had arrived at exactly the right moment. Maggie and David had assumed it came from the church benevolence fund. They had never questioned it. They had been grateful and moved on because that is what you do when you are poor, and someone helps you and you do not want to look too closely at the gift in case it disappears. But it had not been the church. It had been Eleanor, watching from 2 states away, keeping track of a granddaughter she had never met. Through whatever network of informants and distant relatives still connected the branches of a family tree that had been chopped down, but never pulled from the ground. Beneath the receipts, she found a thin folder held with a butterfly clip. Inside were photocopied pages of a contract dated 15 years earlier. between Eleanor Hartwell and Preston Vale, a deposit agreement for the northern parcel. The terms were specific: residential use only, tree line preserved, access road kept open. But attached was a letter from Eleanor's attorney terminating the agreement. Preston had filed a revised development plan with the county that violated every condition, replacing residential use with a commercial resort that would require clearing the north trees and redirecting the road. Behind the letter was a handwritten note in Eleanor's script, smaller than usual, the letters pressed tight. Preston Vale entered the house while I was at the doctor's appointment in the city. Ivy saw his car parked outside the gate for 2 hours. That is why I changed every lock and sealed the north hallway. A man who walks into your house uninvited will take more than the floorboards if you let him. Maggie read the note twice. Now she understood why Preston knew about the wood-paneled cabinets. Not because of inspection reports, not because people told him. Because he had walked through this house while its owner was away, taking measurements, taking notes, taking the kind of inventory a man takes when he has already decided a place belongs to him and is only waiting for the formality of ownership to catch up. She picked up her phone and called Ivy Whitlock. When Maggie asked about Preston and the car outside the gate 15 years ago, Ivy's voice went quiet. "Yes," Ivy said after a pause. "I was maybe 22, 23. I saw his car there on a Tuesday afternoon, which was always when Miss Eleanor went to her appointments. She had a routine. Everyone knew it. He parked under the big maple and went inside through the side door. I told my mother, and my mother told Miss Eleanor." Ivy paused. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the particular weight of a person who had kept a confidence for 15 years and was only now setting it down. After that, she changed all the locks, had a man from Kingston install new deadbolts. She never said his name again, but she kept every piece of paper. Miss Eleanor was not the kind of woman who forgot. She was the kind who filed things in order and waited for the right person to find them. Maggie thanked her and ended the call. She sat in the hidden room surrounded by the paper trail of a life lived in parallel to her own. Close enough to touch, but never touching. And she felt the shape of the story changing. The simple fable of the cold ant dissolving into something far more complicated. A woman who had loved from behind a wall she could not bring herself to tear down. And a man who had walked through that wall without permission and was now standing at the door again, smiling, holding flowers. The sound of a vehicle arriving slower this time reached her from somewhere outside. Not Preston's sedan, something older. The diesel rattle of a truck that had seen many winters. Maggie stood quickly, placed the folder on the tea table, stepped through the panel opening and pulled it nearly shut behind her. She walked to the front door just as the knock came. 3 solid raps that did not ask permission so much as announce arrival. The man on the porch was tall, 68, maybe 70, wearing work pants stained with sawdust and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hands were large and scarred in the way that Hands become scarred when they have spent a lifetime holding tools. His face was weathered, but his eyes were sharp, clear. The eyes of someone who still saw the world in terms of problems that could be solved if you had the right tools and enough patience. "You must be Maggie Brennan," he said. His voice was rough but not unfriendly. "I'm Garrett Whitlock, Ivy's grandfather. She called me, said you might be needing some help with the place." Maggie stepped back to let him in. Garrett walked through the house the way a builder walks through a house, not looking at the furniture or the decoration, but at the bones, the framing, the floors, the way the light came through the windows. He ran his hand along the banister of the staircase and nodded to himself, stopped in the kitchen and opened a cabinet door and closed it again, testing the hinges. "I built most of this," he said, more to himself than to her. "Back in '94, Eleanor hired me to restore the guest rooms, redo the kitchen, fix the porch. Took me 3 summers, but we got it done." "You knew her well then." Garrett turned and looked at Maggie with an expression that was hard to read. "As well as anyone knew Eleanor, which is to say not very well at all. She was not the kind of woman who talked about herself. But she paid fair. She fed me lunch every day I worked here. And she never once told me how to do my job. That counts for something." He walked to the window and looked out at the back garden. "I heard Preston Vale came by this morning." "How did you hear that?" "Small town, people talk, and Preston drives a car that stands out." Garrett folded his arms across his chest. "Did he make you an offer?" "Yes. I figured he would. He has been waiting for Eleanor to die for 15 years. Probably had the paperwork drawn up before she was even in the ground." Maggie moved to stand beside him at the window. "Ivy said you still talk about Eleanor." "I do, because there are things about that woman that deserve to be said out loud." Garrett's voice had an edge now. Not anger, but something close to it. Something that had been held back for a long time and was only now being allowed to surface. "Eleanor and Preston used to be partners. Did you know that?" "No." "Back in the late '90s. Preston was younger then. Still idealistic, or at least he pretended to be. He approached Eleanor with a plan to develop this land. Not all of it, just the northern parcel. He said they could build a small cluster of homes, high-end, environmentally responsible. Keep the trees, preserve the character of the area." Eleanor liked the idea. She thought it might be a way to bring some life back to the town without destroying what made it worth living in. Garrett turned from the window. "They drew up a contract. Preston put down a deposit. They were going to be partners, equal shares. But then Preston got greedy. Or maybe he was always greedy and just hid it better at first. He filed a plan with the county without telling Eleanor. Not for homes, for a resort, conference center, parking lot. The kind of thing that would require cutting down half the forest and turning the back road into a highway. She found out. And she terminated the contract. Gave him back his deposit plus interest. Told him she did not do business with people who lie. Preston did not take it well. He tried to fight it, claimed they had a verbal agreement that superseded the written one. But Eleanor had kept every piece of paper, every email, every note. She buried him in documentation. The lawyer I recommended told Preston to walk away or he would end up paying Eleanor's legal fees on top of his own. Garrett's jaw tightened. That is when he broke in, about 6 months after the contract fell through. Eleanor was at a doctor's appointment in Kingston, Tuesday afternoon. Same time she went every month. Ivy saw his car parked here. 2 hours. When Eleanor came home, nothing was missing. But things had been moved, drawers opened, papers shuffled. She knew someone had been inside. She changed every lock, had me seal that panel in the north hallway where she kept her records. And she never spoke to Preston again. Maggie felt the weight of the story settling over her like a coat she had not asked to wear, but could not take off. Why are you telling me this? Because Preston is going to come back, Garrett said. And when he does, he is going to make that offer sound like the only reasonable choice. He is going to tell you this place is falling apart, that it will bankrupt you, that you would be foolish to keep it, and some of that might even be true. But what he will not tell you is that he has been trying to get his hands on this land for 20 years, and that Eleanor spent the last 15 years of her life making sure he never would. Garrett pulled a business card from his shirt pocket and placed it on the kitchen counter. If you decide to keep this place, I can help. I am 68. I am not as fast as I used to be, but I still know how to fix a house, and I still remember what Eleanor wanted this place to be. After Garrett left, Maggie stood in the kitchen for a long time without moving. The light was fading outside. The room was growing dark. She did not turn on the lamp. She just stood there, in the gathering shadows, and thought about Preston's smile, and the carnations he had brought, and the way he had looked at this house like it was already his. She picked up her phone, found Preston's number in the call log from earlier, and pressed dial. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Brennan, I hope you've had time to think about the offer." "I have," Maggie said. Her voice was steady, flat. The voice she had used with insurance adjusters who tried to deny David's claims, with hospital billing departments that added fees they could not explain, with landlords and creditors and anyone else who had ever assumed she was too old or too tired or too beaten down to fight back. "I'm calling to tell you that I won't be selling the entire property to you." There was a pause, the kind that happens when a script jumps to an unrehearsed page. "I see. May I ask why?" "Because I found the contract file, the one between you and Eleanor, the one she terminated when you filed a revised development plan that violated every condition you agreed to." The silence on the other end was absolute. "And I found the note," Maggie continued, each word placed with precision. "The one about you entering this house while Eleanor was at a doctor's appointment. Ivy saw your car. 2 hours. That is why Eleanor changed the locks. That is why she sealed the north hallway. A man who walks into someone's house uninvited will take more than the floorboards if you let him. Those are her words, not mine. Mrs. Brennan. Preston's voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The polish had cracked. I don't know what you think you found, but I would be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. I am not making accusations. I am stating facts. And the facts are all documented. Contracts, letters, dates, times. Eleanor kept everything. She knew exactly what you were. And now I do too. You are making a mistake. Preston's voice was cold now, hard. That house will bankrupt you in 6 months. The property taxes alone will eat through whatever savings you have. And when you come back looking for a buyer, I promise you the offer will not be as generous. Then I guess I'll have to find another way. Maggie kept her voice level, calm. You can leave me alone, Mr. Vale. Or I can make those documents public. Show them to the town council. Show them to the county planning board. Show them to anyone who might be interested in knowing what kind of man you are. Those are the options. Preston's voice, when it returned, had lost all pretense. I understand. If you change your mind, you have my number. I don't think I will. She ended the call. The silence that followed was clean. The way air is clean after a storm passes. Maggie set the phone on the counter and looked out the window at the darkening yard, at the greenhouse with its cracked panes, at the trees swaying in the wind, at the house Eleanor had spent her life protecting from men like Preston Vale, men who saw land and saw profit, who saw history and saw inconvenience, who saw a home and saw only the empty space where something more valuable could be built. She picked up Preston's envelope, opened it one more time, looked at the number that could have solved every problem she had carried with her from Detroit. Then she tore it in half, and then in half again, and she let the pieces fall into the trash can beside the sink where they belonged. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky. The first stars were appearing, faint and tentative. And somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of Garrett's truck starting up, the diesel engine coughing once before catching, and then the slow crunch of gravel as he drove down the long dirt road toward home. Maggie stood alone in the kitchen of a house she had inherited from a woman she had never met, a house that a man she did not trust wanted to take from her, a house that might bankrupt her or save her, or both. She did not know which yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to let Preston Vale have it. Not now. Not ever. Whatever Eleanor had been protecting all those years, Maggie would protect it too, even if she did not fully understand it yet, even if it cost her everything she had left. Some things you hold on to not because they make sense, but because letting go would mean betraying everyone who held on before you. Maggie returned to the hidden room that night after the call with Preston had ended, and the pieces of his offer lay in the trash can where they belonged. She stood in the doorway looking at the space Eleanor had built, a room with no windows, a room that held everything that mattered and nothing that could be sold. She walked to the piano in the corner and ran her hand across the closed lid. The wood was smooth, but the surface sat slightly uneven. One corner raised a fraction higher than the others. She lifted the lid carefully. Inside, beyond the hammers and strings and the felt strips that had not been touched in years, something white caught the dim light. An envelope, sealed, tucked between two pieces of padding where no one would find it unless they were looking, or unless they knew to look, because someone had left clues along the way, like breadcrumbs through a forest. Maggie pulled it out. The envelope was thick, stiff with age. The paper was the same heavy stock the lawyer had used for the inheritance notice. On the front, in Eleanor's careful handwriting, a single word: terms. She opened it slowly. Inside was not just a letter, but pages. 40 pages, stapled in the corner. The first page was a title sheet: Hartwell House Restoration and Business Plan. Below it, in smaller letters, for whoever has the courage to stay. Maggie sat down on the piano bench and began to read. The document was meticulous, detailed in a way that took her breath away. It was not just a dream or a wish. It was a blueprint, a roadmap. Every step outlined with the precision of someone who had spent years thinking about what would happen after she was gone. There were spreadsheets showing estimated costs for repairs, lists of local suppliers with contact information, and notes about which ones gave discounts and which ones Eleanor had trusted. A renovation checklist organized by priority. Structural repairs first, cosmetic work later. A timeline that assumed one person working with limited help. A budget that assumed limited funds, but made room for the unexpected, because the unexpected always comes. There were photographs of the house from different eras, blueprints showing the original layout and the changes that have been made over the decades. Notes about which walls were load-bearing and which could be removed if someone wanted to open up the space. Recommendations for paint colors that would honor the history of the house without making it feel like a museum. Ideas for marketing. How to reach people who were looking for a place that felt like home instead of a hotel. How to price the rooms fairly without undervaluing the experience. And woven through all of it in the margins and on separate pages tucked between the business sections were letters. Short ones. A paragraph here. A few sentences there. Written to Maggie. To Gracie. To the person Eleanor had never met, but had somehow known would come. If you are reading this, you have decided to stay, or at least you are thinking about it. This house needs someone who understands that a home is built by hands, not just money. I have left you the blueprint, the contacts, the numbers, everything I know. The rest is up to you. I cannot do this work for you, but I can make it easier. That is all any of us can do for the people who come after. Make it a little easier, and hope they have the strength to finish what we started. The second will was paper clipped to the back of the business plan, handwritten on legal paper, signed by Eleanor Hartwell, notarized by a public notary in Millbrook, New York. It stated that if the heir chose to retain the property and remain in residence for a minimum of 1 year, working in good faith to restore the guest house to operational condition, a trust account at First National Bank would be activated. The account contained $120,000, sufficient to cover all outstanding property taxes, basic renovation costs, and operating expenses for the first year. If the property was sold within the first year, the entire amount would transfer to the Women's Charitable Foundation of Millbrook. Eleanor had planned for both outcomes. She had not forced anyone's hand. She had placed 2 doors side by side and let the person who found them choose. But the door that led to keeping the house required something money could not buy. It required a year of Maggie's life, a year away from Detroit, away from the hospital gift counter, away from the house where David's absence lived in every room, a year in a town where she knew almost no one, in a house that needed more repair than she could afford even with the trust fund, with nothing but Eleanor's silent faith that she would come, and that when she came, she would stay. Maggie sat on the piano bench holding the papers in both hands. Outside, the wind touched the trees. Inside the house was quiet. She thought about the hospital bills, about Sloane's voice telling her not to complicate things, about the sensible choice and the foolish choice, and the fact that she had spent 3 years making nothing but sensible choices. And where had it gotten her? Nowhere, just deeper into debt, deeper into a life that felt like waiting for permission to start living. She stood up, walked to the tea table, placed the business plan on the surface where the light from the ceiling fixture could reach it. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number Garrett Whitlock had given her. It was past 9 in the evening, but she called anyway because some decisions cannot wait for morning. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was rough with sleep but alert. "Maggie, I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to tell me the truth. Not what you think I want to hear. The truth." "All right. Can this house be saved? Can it be restored? Can it be made into something people would want to come to? Or is that just a fantasy Eleanor had that died with her?" There was a pause, not because Garrett did not know the answer, but because he was choosing his words carefully. "The house is sound. The bones are good. The foundation is solid. The roof needs work. The plumbing needs updating. The electrical is old but functional. The porch needs reinforcing. Some of the windows need replacing. The greenhouse needs attention. It is a lot of work, but it is not impossible. Not if you have help. Not if you are willing to learn. Would you help me?" Another pause, longer this time. "How much help are we talking about?" "Enough to rebuild this house. Enough to turn it back into a guest house. The way Eleanor wanted it. The way it was before she got too old to keep it up." Garrett breathed out slowly. She could hear him thinking, calculating. "I am 68 years old, Maggie. I am not as fast as I used to be. My knees complain when the weather turns. I can work 4, maybe 5 hours a day before I need to rest. But yes, if you are serious about this, I can help. I can teach you what I know. I can bring in people I trust when we need extra hands. But it will take time, months, maybe longer. I have a year. A year. Garrett repeated the words like he was testing their weight. That might be enough, if we start soon, if we work steady, if nothing goes too wrong. When can we start? How about tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock? I will bring my tools and we will walk through the house together. Make a list. Figure out what needs to be done first. Then we will see. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Wait until you have spent a few weeks swinging a hammer and sanding floors and crawling under sinks. Then we will see if you still want to thank me. After the call ended, Maggie sat down at the tea table and opened Eleanor's business plan to the first checklist. She took a pen from her pocket and began making notes in the margins, questions to ask Garrett, things she needed to learn, supplies she would need to buy. By the time she looked up again, it was past midnight. Her hand ached from writing, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months, maybe years. She had a purpose now, something to do that was not just surviving, something to build that was not just a wall against the cold. She called Naomi, the lawyer in Chicago, the next morning, asked about the cadastral map Garrett had mentioned. Naomi had already pulled the estate files. She knew exactly what Maggie was talking about. Eleanor kept that map in the house, Naomi said. Third shelf from the bottom in the living room bookcase, behind the encyclopedias. She told me once that lawyers lose things and county clerks retire, but maps drawn on good paper last longer than either. Maggie found it exactly where Naomi said, rolled in a cardboard tube. The paper was thick and slightly yellowed, but the lines were still sharp. Drawn with the meticulous precision of a surveyor who understood that accuracy on paper prevents conflict on the ground. The boundaries of the northern parcel were marked clearly. They did not overlap with anything Preston Vale or anyone else could claim. If Preston files a boundary dispute, we will send him this, Naomi said. It will shut him down immediately, but I do not think he will. Men like Preston Vale only fight battles they think they can win. Once he knows you have documentation, he will move on to easier targets. What if he does not? Then we bury him in paperwork. We make it so expensive and so time-consuming that he gives up. But honestly, Maggie, I do not think it will come to that. You called his bluff. That is usually enough. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Preston's attorney. It asserted a boundary dispute over the northern parcel. The claim stated that the land Maggie intended to sell overlapped with the plot Preston had acquired from a previous owner. Without resolution, no sale to the town council could proceed. It was a legal trap, a way to tie the property up in court and make it impossible for Maggie to do anything with it. Naomi responded within 24 hours. She sent a copy of the cadastral map, a letter from the county clerk confirming the boundaries, and a politely worded suggestion that Preston's attorney review the documentation carefully before proceeding further. Preston's attorney did not reply. The dispute was never filed, and Preston Vale did not call again. "He is done," Naomi said when she called to give Maggie the update. "He knows he has no case, and he knows you are not going to be intimidated. Men like that, they rely on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. Once they realize you are not, they fold." Maggie stood in the kitchen holding the phone and looking out at the back garden, where the weeds had started to thin, because she had spent the last 3 mornings pulling them. "I am not selling the northern parcel anymore," she said. "I am keeping it. All of it. We will need that land for parking when the guests come." There was a pause. Then Naomi laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from surprise and admiration mixed together. "Eleanor would have liked you." The sound of a vehicle arriving pulled Maggie from her thoughts 3 days later. She was in the front yard with Garrett. He was showing her how to use a circular saw to cut new boards for the porch. The whine of the blade had just stopped when she heard the car. Not Preston's sedan. Something smaller. A compact. It came up the drive fast and stopped with a spray of gravel. Sloane got out first. Her face was set in the particular expression she wore when she had made up her mind about something and was not going to be talked out of it. Behind her, moving more slowly, was a boy, 8 years old. Black hair falling across his forehead, holding a backpack in one hand and a comic book in the other. Dashiell. Dash. Sloane's son. Maggie had not seen him in 6 months. "You did not say you were coming," Maggie said, setting down the saw. "I was not sure I should." Sloane looked around the yard. At Garrett. At the pile of lumber. At the new boards already nailed to the porch frame. "But you texted that you were staying, and then you went silent again. So I drove out here to see what exactly is happening." Dash edged closer to his grandmother. "This house is really big," he said softly. His voice carried the wonder of a boy who had grown up in apartments and measured space in rooms, not acres. Maggie placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you tired from the drive?" "No. Mom bought me French fries at the rest stop." Sloane folded her arms. "Mom, do not change the subject. I need to understand what you are doing. The lawyer called me. She said you are not selling, that you are planning to stay here and restore the house. Is that true?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because there is more to this place than I understood. More than any of us understood." "Then show me," Sloane said. Her voice was sharp, but under the sharpness was something else. Something that sounded like it might be fear. "Show me what is so important that you are willing to risk everything." Maggie did not answer with words. She walked to the front door. Sloane and Dash followed. Garrett stayed in the yard. He knew this was not his moment. Inside, Maggie led them through the house to the north hallway. She placed her hand on the panel and pushed. It slid open easily now. She had oiled the mechanism. The hidden room no longer felt hidden. Just quiet. Just waiting. Sloane stopped at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. looking in the way someone looks into water before deciding whether to step in or walk away. Dash had no such hesitation. He slipped past his mother and through the opening with the easy courage of a boy who had not yet learned that some rooms hold more than furniture. He moved straight to the photographs on the wall, his face tilted upward, eyes scanning the images with focused attention. Sloane followed slowly. Her eyes moved from the armchair to the couch, to the piano, to the wooden box lying open on the tea table. She stopped in the center of the room and stood very still. Maggie could see the calculations happening behind her daughter's eyes, the rapid sorting of what is valuable and what is not, followed by the slower, harder realization that value is not always a number. "How long have you known about this room?" Sloane asked quietly. "A few days, maybe a week. I lost track." Maggie picked up the stack of letters tied with the blue ribbon, the ones Eleanor had written to Helen but never sent. She held them out. Sloane took them with both hands, a slight hesitation before opening. She pulled out the first letter, unfolded it, and began to read. Maggie watched the tension in her daughter's jaw shift from resistance to attention, to something that did not have a name yet. Dash had drifted to the far wall where children's drawings were clipped to ribbons alongside the photographs. He pointed at one. A sheet of construction paper faded from bright yellow to the color of weak sunlight. A house with a triangle roof, smoke curling from a chimney. 3 figures standing by the front door with extended arms and circle faces. "This looks like the kind of thing I used to draw in 1st grade, Dash said. Sloane glanced over at what her son was pointing at. Then she froze. Maggie saw it happen. The exact moment her body went rigid, the breath catching somewhere between lungs and throat. In the lower corner of the drawing, barely visible after decades of fading, were the uneven letters of a child who had just learned to write. Sloane. And beside it, in Eleanor's careful script, a date and 3 words, kept for always. The drawing was Sloane's, made when she was 5 or 6, sent through channels Maggie had never known existed, and preserved here in this windowless room behind a wall, with the same care Eleanor brought to everything she touched. Sloane pulled a chair from the tea table and sat down, without looking away from the drawing. She opened the second letter. The room grew quiet in a way that was not empty but full. The kind of quiet that accumulates when people are reading words that were meant for them, but arrived decades too late. Maggie arranged the receipts and notes into small piles on the table. One pile for things sent to Detroit, one for unsent letters to Helen, one for notes about Sloane as a child. Dash moved from photograph to photograph along the wall with solemn attentiveness. When Sloane finished the second letter, she looked up. Her face had lost its color, gone pale beneath the light, eyes wet though no tears had fallen. "She paid for my drawing class." The words came out flat, stripped of everything except the fact. "It seems so," Maggie said. "And the money for repairing the fireplace that year, the one Dad always said came from the church fund." Maggie nodded. Sloane lowered her head to another letter. Her fingers trembled slightly at the edges of the paper. Why did no one tell us? Maybe because no one knew. Or maybe because someone did know and found it easier to keep being angry than to admit the story they had been telling was wrong. Dash picked up a photograph and brought it to Maggie. Grandma is this mom when she was little. A girl of about 7 wearing a blue coat, standing in the back garden of the guest house, holding a basket of apples. The face was unmistakable, the same sharp chin, the same way of leaning forward into whatever came next. Maggie looked at the picture and felt something click into place. It must be from when your grandmother Helen brought your mother here to visit. Sloane looked up from the letter. I came here. Your grandmother must have brought you. I never knew about the visit. She never told me. Sloane shook her head slowly, a memory surfacing in her face, the way a shape surfaces in water when the ripples settle. I remember a long trip. I was very small. There was a smell in the kitchen, cinnamon, I think, and a cat lying on the doorstep. The cat's name was June, Maggie said. Your grandmother told that story once years ago. I did not realize she was talking about this place. Sloane looked around the room, at the letters, at the photographs, at the drawing with her name on it. I kept thinking you were holding on to a place that had nothing to do with us. But it turns out I am the one who knew nothing. Maggie sat down on the couch across from her. I did not know either. I only found all this in the last few days. What are you going to do? The question filled the room slowly, evenly, all the way to the edge. I am not going to sell this house, Maggie said. I am going to restore it, turn it back into a guest house, the way Eleanor wanted, the way it was before she got too old to keep it up. The bills in Detroit are not going to disappear, I know. There are documents in here, a small savings fund, a few old bonds in Eleanor's name, and a trust account that will activate if I stay here for a year and work to restore the house. It is not enough to solve everything, but it is enough to start, enough to keep going. Sloane studied her mother's face. And this house, you are keeping it for what? So it does not become a parking lot for weekend visitors who will never know what stood here. So our family has a place to come back to when we need one. And so I do not have to pretend one more time that what was lost should just stay lost. Maggie held her daughter's gaze. There are things that deserve to be kept, even when keeping them is hard, especially when keeping them is hard. Dash looked up from the floor where he had been arranging photographs in careful rows. Can we come here in the summer? Sloane looked at her son, then at the photograph in his hand. She breathed out, and for the first time since arriving, the tension left her shoulders, not all at once, but in stages, the way ice melts. Maybe. Sloane stayed 2 extra days. She did not announce this as a decision. She simply did not leave on the morning she had planned. And when Maggie noticed, Sloane shrugged and said she had made a few calls, and the office could manage without her until the end of the week. They worked. Not with any grand plan, but with the practical, unhurried rhythm of two people who have decided that a place is worth saving and are figuring out how. Morning, Sloane sat on the front porch with her laptop handling work calls, her voice carrying through the open windows into the house where Maggie was on her knees scrubbing floors or testing water pressure upstairs. Afternoons they worked together, measuring the porch roof for repair estimates, testing which windows still opened and which had swollen shut, checking the kitchen pipes with the wrench Garrett had lent them. Dash painted the window boxes along the back of the house with a seriousness that bordered on reverence, choosing a shade of blue from old paint cans found in the greenhouse, the same blue as the coat in the photograph of his mother as a little girl. When Maggie asked him why that color, he looked at her with the uncomplicated honesty of a child who does not yet know that some answers carry more weight than the question deserves, because it is the color Mom was wearing when she was happy and did not know it yet. In the evenings, the three of them sat in the hidden room. Sloane read through the remaining letters. Dash arranged photographs in rows on the rug, building a timeline from images he could not fully understand, but seemed to recognize on some level deeper than knowledge. Maggie brought food on the small plates Ivy had included with the muffins, and they ate in the quiet, companionable way that people eat when the food is secondary to the being together. On the second evening, Ivy stopped by with a casserole dish and a bottle of apple cider. She stood in the doorway of the hidden room for a long moment, looking at the photographs on the wall. Maggie watched the woman's face change, the careful composure softening into something unguarded and raw. Ivy reached up and touched the edge of a photograph showing a small girl sitting on porch steps with a book open on her lap. "That is me," she said quietly. "I must have been 8. I did not know she kept this." She stood there for another moment, her fingertips resting on the edge of the photograph. Then she took a breath and smiled in the way people smile when they are trying to hold something inside that wants very much to come out. She kept more than any of us knew. I think that was her way, keeping things instead of saying them, as if the keeping was the saying. 6 months passed. The work was hard, harder than Maggie had imagined, but not impossible. Garrett came every morning at 8. He taught her how to use tools she had never held before, how to measure twice and cut once, how to read the grain of wood and know where it would split, how to patch plaster and sand floors and replace rotten boards without disturbing the ones that were still good. He was patient. He did not talk down to her. He showed her once and then watched while she did it herself. And when she made mistakes, he showed her how to fix them without making her feel foolish. Ivy helped with the interiors, choosing paint colors, hanging curtains that local women had sewn from fabric Ivy found at estate sales, arranging furniture in ways that made the rooms feel welcoming without feeling crowded. Dash came back twice, once in the summer, once in the fall. Both times he worked on the window boxes, planting flowers in the spring, pulling weeds in the autumn. Sloane came when she could, every other weekend at first, then every weekend. Then for a full week in August when she took vacation time and worked alongside her mother from dawn until dusk. The community helped. Garrett's friends, retired men who had worked construction or carpentry or plumbing in their younger years and were not ready to stop using their hands just because they had reached an age when society said they should. The owner of the hardware store in town gave them discounts on supplies. A woman who ran a small bakery brought bread and pastries every Friday. A man who owned a tree service came and cleared the fallen branches and trimmed the overgrown shrubs for half his usual rate because he remembered Eleanor and said she had once helped his daughter when no one else would. Maggie learned more in those 6 months than she had learned in the previous 6 years. She learned that a house is not just walls and a roof. It is layers, generations, decisions made by people long dead that still affect the people living inside. She learned that restoring something old is harder than building something new, because you have to honor what came before while making room for what comes next. She learned that her body was stronger than she thought, that her hands could do things she had assumed were beyond her, that 64 was not the end of anything, it was just a number. And numbers do not get to decide what you are capable of. Preston Vale appeared one more time. It was late October. The air had turned cold. The leaves had fallen. Maggie was on the porch with Garrett. They were replacing the last section of railing. She saw the black sedan coming up the drive, and her first instinct was to go inside, lock the door, pretend she had not seen him. But Garrett put a hand on her arm and shook his head. "Let him come," Garrett said. "Let him see what you have done." Preston got out of the car. He was not wearing the sport coat this time, just a plain jacket, jeans. He looked tired, older. He walked up to the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Maggie and Garrett, looking at the new railing, at the fresh paint on the window frames, at the repaired shingles on the roof. "You should have taken my offer," Preston said. His voice was quiet, almost sad. "This house will consume you." Maggie set down the hammer she had been holding. She wiped her hands on her jeans. "You are right. It has consumed me. But not the way you think." She walked to the edge of the porch, looked down at him. "Eleanor did not leave me a house, Preston. She left me a purpose, something you never understood. You looked at this place and saw profit. She looked at it and saw people. All the people who came here over the years looking for a place to rest, a place to belong. That is what she was protecting, not the land, not the trees. The idea that there are still places in the world where people matter more than money." Preston looked around, at the yard, at the greenhouse with its new glass panes, at the garden where the paths had been cleared and the flower beds replanted. "She would have been proud," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Not much, just enough to let Maggie know that whatever he had become, he had not started out that way, that somewhere along the line he had lost something he could not get back, and that he knew it. He turned and walked back to his car, got in. and drove away. Maggie watched until the sedan disappeared beyond the trees. Then she picked up the hammer and went back to work. Spring came. The first guests arrived on a Saturday in late April, when the daffodils were blooming and the air smelled like rain and new grass. An elderly couple, married 50 years. They had seen the listing online, a small notice on a website for historic inns. They wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere that felt like a home instead of a hotel. Somewhere they could sit on a porch and watch the world without the world demanding anything from them. Maggie showed them to the room overlooking the back garden, the one with the lace curtains and the quilt on the bed, the one that smelled like lavender and old wood. The woman stood at the window for a long time without speaking. Then she turned to Maggie with tears in her eyes. "It is perfect," she said. "It is exactly what we needed." Garrett stood on the porch with Maggie that evening after the guests had gone to their room. The sun was setting, the light turning everything gold. "Eleanor knew you would make it," he said. "She told me once, years ago. She said the right person would come. Someone who understands that keeping a house is keeping a promise." Sloan and Dash came that weekend to help with the first guests. Sloan made breakfast. Dash set the table. Maggie served the food on the blue-rimmed porcelain plates Eleanor had kept in the upper cabinet. And they all sat together in the breakfast room with the windows open and the spring air coming in and the sound of birds in the trees. It felt like a beginning, or maybe an ending, or maybe both at once. The way life always is when you stop running from one thing and start running toward another. 3 months later, on a morning in July, when the heat had settled over the valley like a blanket, Maggie sat at the desk in Eleanor's old bedroom, now her bedroom, and she opened the last letter Eleanor had left, the one at the very bottom of the stack, the one she had been saving because once it was read, there would be no more. And she was not ready for there to be no more. The letter was short, just 1 page. The handwriting was slightly less steady than the others, as if Eleanor had been very tired when she wrote it, or very old, or both. "Dear Gracie, if you are reading this, you have finished the work. You have learned what I learned, that a legacy is not what you leave behind, but what you give forward. This house is not about the past. It is about all the people who will come here looking for a place to belong. You have kept my promise. Now make your own." Maggie folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the drawer of the desk where she would keep it along with all the others. Then she walked downstairs and out onto the porch where Garrett was sitting in the chair he had claimed as his own, the chair next to the one that had been Eleanor's, the one Maggie sat in now. He had brought 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her without a word. They sat in the silence that people who have worked together can sit in. The silence that is not empty but full of everything they have already said and do not need to say again. A car came up the drive. A young family. 2 parents. 2 children. The boy ran ahead, straight into the garden, chasing something only he could see. His sister followed more slowly, looking up at the house with the particular wonder of a child Who has never been anywhere that felt like this? Maggie stood, set down her tea, and walked to the door to greet them. Her smile was not the tired smile she had worn in Detroit. Not the smile of someone counting coins and waiting for the next bill to arrive. It was something else, something peaceful, something that comes from knowing you have done what you were meant to do, even when you did not know what that was. She opened the door wide. "Welcome to Hartwell House," she said. "We have been waiting for you."